Hi, everybody. It's David Wildstein at the New Jersey Globe. We are here on the final evening of Phil Murphy's 8 years as governor, just to talk about the governor's legacy, talk about what's happened in New Jersey over the last 8 years. And I'm joined by 7 people who had a ringside seat to most of it, if not in some cases all of it. And I'm just going to go straight across, not in any particular order of seniority, but Mike DeLamater, former Deputy Chief of Staff, Parimal Garg, who was the second Chief Counsel, George Helmy, who was the second Chief of Staff, Bryan, who was the first Press Secretary and the first Senior Advisor, Tim Hillmann, who was the fourth Chief of Staff, Senator Jon Bramnick, representing the fighting Republican Party on this live stream, and Christine Guhl-Sadovy, who was is now the president of the Board of Public Utilities, but was the cabinet secretary and served in the Murphy administration for 8 years. So thank you for everybody for joining me. And let me start out with asking this question. I can start with the people that were with the governor really from before the beginning. Go back 10 years. How did Phil Murphy get here? I mean, this is, I didn't think he was going to win when he first got in the race, but I have been wrong frequently before. Dan, you were, Parimal, you were in the original staffs. Quickly, how did he get there?
So, David, I was a part of one of the meetings he did. So, before he ran for governor, he went around and did a blitz of meetings throughout the state. And in my previous job, I was chief of staff to the mayor of Hoboken. One of the last meetings I took before I left that job was with then Ambassador Phil Murphy. And, we were probably one of 10 meetings he did that day. And as everyone here knows, he did them for weeks and months on end. And what you saw in that meeting, he kind of took it grudgingly of, this guy's not going to win, but we'll take the meeting. What can you do? And what you saw in that meeting was force of personality, absolute dynamo. And you got the sense that if he got into the race, he was going to be a force to be reckoned with. This wasn't going to be, hey, if I run, if I win, that's great. If not, I just want to make some points. You got the sense that he was going to run through any wall, do anything he had to do to win the race, because it seemed like he really had a vision and truly cared about the state. So blew me away. That was my first introduction to him. He did that dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of times throughout the state.
And Parimal, you were on the original staff. I mean, you finished as a law clerk to the Chief Justice. You were practicing law. I'm sure your parents were thrilled that you left that and went to work for a campaign of a guy in like third or fourth place. But yeah. What drove you there?
Yeah, well, I think Dan said it really well in that, after the governor came back as ambassador to Germany, came back to New Jersey, he really started laying the groundwork, even in late 2013. And what Dan said about his meeting with him, I think is probably true for literally thousands of meetings that he did up and down the state. Every single one, he was well prepared. Every single one, he knew about the person he was meeting with. He really took the time to learn about the state. He was starting fresh in a lot of ways. He had served the state in various capacities, including having served on a pension benefits reform task force, but not having been in elected office, he could really think about his vision for the state from a fresh perspective and a clean slate. And that was one of the reasons that drew me to him, because he didn't have the connectivity to the political machines the way that some other candidates did. He was able to think, from a new perspective about what the right thing to do for New Jersey was. And we really hadn't had that type of long-term thinking in a long time. I think that's why our credit rating had suffered under previous decades of management in the state. And that was really the thing that drew me to him. Like a lot of other people, I definitely didn't know if he could win. There were certainly other candidates that had a lot more establishment support. But watching the things that he was saying around the state, and certainly after meeting him, I was absolutely convinced that he was the best person for the job.
And Mike, you were on that campaign. So did you did you think he was going to win when you signed up?
So I signed up, I want to say in June 2016, and I did. In fact, I told former Chairman Stellato that in my meeting with him, and at the time, and obviously things are not quite as strong today in this regard, but a lot of the northern counties were with or lining up to back former Mayor Fulop, and a lot of the southern counties were lining up to back former Senate President Steve Sweeney. And I kind of come to the conclusion, talking to people, a lot of people quietly were going to support Phil if it came down to it over either of those two individuals. But he had a way with people politically that is very rare. Whereas if he knew you weren't with him, it didn't matter. He kind of, I've been at a variety of meetings in that time period where he said, listen, I don't want to be, just make me your second choice and we'll circle back. Kept lines of communication open. So even if the person wasn't supporting him and he was their second choice, he'd constantly be communicating. Almost, it seemed 24/7. I think everyone in the state has a cell phone number. And so, I did. I didn't really know. I think his team at the time, November 2015, was probably the first time I met the then ambassador. But by June of 2016, I did have a very good feeling that he was going to win and be the next.
So history should record that Mike DeLamater was the first in New Jersey.
I don't think I was the first.
Okay, we'll record that. I mean, I want to ask. Let me start with this. Maybe the best way is just to do a show of hands. As you grade Phil Murphy, how many here give him an A+? Okay. And so now this is the runoff between DeLamater and Bramnick. Any A's? An A. And so Senator Bramnick, what grade do you give him?
I'd give him a B minus. Generally, I think he did some good things, and I think there's some things he could have done better. Now, as a friend, I'll give him an A+. As a policy person, I'll give him a B.
Okay. You just with that saved Justice Noriega's seat, I think.
I think he has 6 more years. Just so
I mean, Senator Helmy, you came in early 2019, longest serving governor's chief of staff in New Jersey's history. What do you believe the governor's legacy is? Not just from a policy standpoint, but more importantly, as a leader. Where do you see him in terms of what people are going to remember him as?
Yeah, I sort of pull the string that Mike left there. I think the thing that made Phil so unique was just who he was in terms of the relationships, right? So, Senator Bramnick and many other Republicans, others downstream that were Republicans, even if they disagreed with his policy, I think what made him an A+ politician is he was so, willing to sit down with basically anybody and have a civil conversation. We'd go up and do this, meeting with the Lake Hopatcong mayors that Tim would staff every year. And those guys didn't agree with us on a lot of things, but he was just so cordial. It became a staple. Those mayors looked forward to it. And I think, every governorship, every administration has its own challenges. And I don't think you rate governors strictly by, where they were on one thing or another, but did they lead? Were they true to what they said they were going to do? Did they try to bring people together? And did they what they said they were going to be on day one? Did they run through the tape as that same person? 8 years later, and that's why to me, Phil was an A+. And the reason that, as Dave, when I came in 2019 and served, as the longest serving chief, it was frankly, the team was fantastic. We were fighting for really important things. I loved the job, but it was really always Phil and Tammy. They were such unique human beings that led with such integrity and dignity. It made it easy to do that for as long as we did. And that's why he's an A+, just because of the class of human being he is.
And Tim, you came in 2 chiefs of staff later, but what's your?
Yeah, no, I would just to keep going on what George said. It's 100% how he treats people. I don't think a lot of people remember during COVID, I think it was every day for 2 years, he called 3 grieving families. Just the tax that takes on someone to talk to someone who just lost a loved one. He did it every day, which was a pretty amazing thing. And he treats everyone like that. Just a funny aside, this happened to George, I know, a bunch of times, but we've had people go to him and say, hey, can you have your chief give me a call? And he gets back to them before we can. He's so responsive and so on top of it.
It was worse. He would have like a councilman from some town with 4,000 people text him, and then he just forward you and I'm like, I don't know who this is.
I think that's happened to everyone here, where you get a text message forwarded. Can you give this guy a call?
David, I would also just say, like, you know, that's not to paint the governor as like this easygoing, nice, great, wonder. You know, he was as tough a boss as I've ever had, but it's because you knew it was always coming from the right place, and he was holding you as accountable as he was holding himself. That's what made the job so great.
What was he like to work for on a day-to-day basis? You say nobody's perfect. There's got to be days where he's lost his cool with people, and what was he like? You know, not as a leader now, but as a boss for you guys.
He was tough. He clear expectations, but the best thing about him, he could get upset about something, and 10 minutes later he's telling a joke, and you're back on the good side and just working towards the same goal. But I think everyone would agree, tough, but probably the fairest anyone could be.
Yeah, I would say he was always 100% dialed in. If you gave him a memo, he would read every word of it and he would internalize it, and you'd never have to tell him anything in that memo again. If you told him something, he'd remember that you told him that forever. If you texted him, you'd get a response back. If he wasn't at a podium somewhere giving a speech, it would usually be within seconds. If you emailed him, you'd get a response back immediately. He was just always dialed in. And like Tim said, he had an incredible ability, more than anyone I've ever met, to be able to shift focus from issue to issue and just not lose a beat, which is really a remarkable skill for a chief executive.
So he's famously a inbox zero guy, right? So every text, every email, every single day is read and responded to. The only way that is possible is for the people around this call, other than maybe Senator Bramnick sometimes, the people around this call and the people on his team, when he got something, he had someone to follow up on it. The only way that worked is if his staff was as automatic as he was, right? And we all learned that early on. I certainly learned that the hard way early on, that when you follow up on something, it can't be tomorrow, it can't be the next day. It has to be automatic. He can't worry about it. He has to know, when I give Dan something, it will happen. It will get taken care of. If you mess up once, you don't mess up twice. But it's worked the same way back with him, right? If I'd say, hey, Gov, can you lob in a text to X person, right? Can you do this? Can you say this? Never had to follow up, never had to worry about it. It was automatic. So he needed us to be automatic. And anytime you give him something, it was automatic. So it's pretty incredible to work in that high efficiency of an environment.
So, Senator Bramnick, you've been around the legislature for a while. You were Assembly Minority Leader when the governor came in. Now you're a senator. How was the governor in dealing with the legislative branch?
I think he was somebody who was responsive. The most important thing I noticed about Governor Murphy was he was being attacked early on by people in his own party, but he didn't take the bait. He might have done that when he went back in the office with the other people on this Zoom call. But in terms of the camera, he never made it personal. And one of the mistakes I thought that politicians do is they get mad or they want to get back at people. He may have done that. I've never seen that. So all the people who attacked Phil Murphy fell by the wayside. And part of it was his response, which was never to take the bait. In terms of dealing with the legislature, I don't care if it was a Democrat or Republican. So many people would text him and he would respond. With all due respect to my friend Chris Christie, he's a good friend, sometimes he responded, sometimes he didn't, depending on the topic. But Phil Murphy always responded, whether you like the response or not.
Is it, let me get a show of hands as to whether this group thinks that Phil Murphy was better for New Jersey than Chris Christie was. I'm good. I'm good.
You know, it just, you know, it depends really on the issue, right?
Yeah.
You know, each issue is different. But what Phil Murphy did really well, and I thought he did it really well, people, and I remember talking to people like Chris Christie when Jack was running against him. People may not like taxes, but they did not dislike Phil Murphy. And part of this business is whether they liked you. All these consultants are telling you, oh, talk about taxes, talk about regulation. So wait a minute. First, they have to like you. And I have to tell you, people really like them. I'm not talking about the right wing of my party, but I'm talking about generally New Jerseyans liked him. And that was for good reason.
So one of the things I've been curious about is, you know, as a journalist covering the governor, I started the Globe 2 weeks before he took office. And I've learned some of these Murphyisms, you know, that I and there's a lot of them. You know, I want to ask each of you what your favorite is, but let me start. If somebody, maybe Senator Helmy, if you could explain to me, what does white hot mad mean?
Oh, there's so that's a good one. There's like many iterations of like levels of anger in the Murphy orbit, and part of being chief of staff was to understand the various levels and how you filtered action from that. So white hot mad was pretty near the top. My favorite Murphyism would be when he'd be talking to somebody and then you'd hear "I love you," and you knew there was going to be a hard stop and then a "but go away" or "but we're not doing that." The "I love you" was the softener, and then there was the punch coming, and you just never knew the level of punch you were about to take.
Let's go right through it, Tim. You know, we'll want to hear everybody's. So.
Yeah, George is right. We moved on to a spicy level now on response, more of the Taco Bell sauces. So that's what we've been working with recently. I think towards the end, one that I've enjoyed is if you take the world's 2 most powerful telescopes and you put them together and look through it, that's how much I care about that. And one of the PG ones I could share with my kids roaming around the house.
Yeah, exactly.
Christine, what's your favorite?
Oh, I think as someone who's not a sports person, that definitely a disadvantage in the Murphy world. There were so many sports analogies that I will admit I had to probably look up one or the other to see what I was supposed to be doing. So bringing the ball down, down the fields. Those are some that I've used now in my own life about getting something done.
So how many of you, and this is an evening, it's on the record, but it's an evening for truthisms. How many of you now use "I have no color" on that in your real lives when you're asked the question?
All the time.
I use way too many of them have crept into my real life.
Yeah, I use 1 + 1 = 3.
Tell it to me like I'm a kindergartner.
Yes.
Yeah.
My favorite sports analogy is when he calls people 5-tool athletes. He calls a lot of people 5-tool athletes, and as a pretty big sports fan, there really aren't that many 5-tool athletes. Always a generous compliment.
It's a high compliment, David. I'm gonna give you a 3 here. I'm gonna give you one that's practical, one that I've never heard anyone else say, and one that is most devastating. Most practical one that I've taken is machine. So machine means if you're talking about something with him, hey, we should do this. Can you machine that? Right? Can you tell George to machine that? Something like that means, can they get it done? Can you just get it done? It also means I don't want to hear about it again until it's done, right? So machine number 1. Number 2, we're at a press conference once, and early on, he was kind of needed some at-bats in his parlance. So he was getting better and better, and he said, how do you think we did? So you do really well. Like, we prepped, you're getting better, love it. And he goes, it's like a pig through a python. I said, what? He goes, yeah, it's like a pig through a python. Python eats a pig, and you can see the slow, steady progress as you digest it. Okay, fair enough. And the most devastating thing he could say to somebody, either by text, usually by text, although I saw it once in person, is "be well." Be well is devastating. So I saw it once in person. One of our colleagues who remained unnamed came into a meeting one time, said something to the governor. The governor was not happy with, and he just looked down and he said, "Be well." And it was the most devastating thing I've ever heard say to anybody. So that was about as mad, if he didn't want to show it, as mad as he could get to if someone was "Be well."
Now you're making me feel I've got to go through all my old text messages and
I'm pretty sure you haven't gotten that one.
see if that was ever there. I don't know. I mean,
It would be the last one you got, Dave. You don't have to worry about it.
talk to me about, because this was very much a partnership in the Murphy administration between Phil and Tammy. Talk to me about the First Lady and her influence on him and her influence on the state. What's her legacy?
I'll start. I mean, she truly was an equal partner. I mean, she was a sounding board for him. She was a sounding board for us. She was a moral compass. She was brilliant on policy, not only in the issue areas that she cared about, but she spent a lot of time talking to subject matter experts on issues across the country, and would come back to us and say, "Hey, have you thought about it this way? Have you thought about it that way?" And she just was a wonderful, way of talking to the team outside of Phil, talking to the team when Phil was in the room, like a true partner. And then she was an incredible ambassador. So the legislature and, Jon and his wife and many others, have as good a relationship with Tammy as they have with Phil. So she was a wonderful brand ambassador for the Murphys, but also for our policies or for the state of New Jersey. She was as beloved by, Senate President Scutari and Craig Coughlin as she was by others. And so she was just a great ambassador on the back and forth on like some really tough times. And when temperatures got hot, she was also like a wonderful person to bring us together and help through social engagements, bring people around the table to break bread where a lot of the work, in our business is done. So a true partner and a wonderful brand ambassador. And I would say one last thing, being a little bit long here, is there were so many times, either because we were on the losing end of a negotiation or in the dark days of COVID, where it was Tammy who reached out to make sure you were doing okay. And it was just that motherly instinct of her to make sure you were doing fine and pick you back up. And she was just wonderful.
Yeah, I would say that, just as I was saying earlier, that Phil was always 100% locked in. Tammy was every bit 100% locked in at all times too. I think that's one of the reasons she's one of the best fundraisers, not just in New Jersey, but around the country, because she's tenacious, but she digs into the bottom of every issue that she's working on, and she becomes a true subject matter expert. I think we saw that with maternal and infant health, most importantly. But she is as disciplined, as tenacious, and as tough, but also, as George was saying, as caring a leader as I've ever met. So she was, if you ever texted her, you would get a response back. Most times her responses would be longer than his, so they wouldn't come instantaneously, but nothing ever slipped through the cracks with her.
So this is a story, David, I like to tell to describe Tammy to people that don't know her. During COVID, when she wanted to do the Jersey for Jersey benefit, which you remember, just kind of a telethon, raising money, raised something like $30, $40, $50 million for people in New Jersey dealing with COVID. And I'm driving home, and she calls me and says, "Dan, can I add you to a call?" I said, "Sure." Adds me to the call. It is a dozen luminaries in the entertainment industry, artists, producers, names I could tell you, but I won't, given the context of this call. So very intimidating. And she just adds me to zero context. So she adds me because they are telling her we cannot do the telethon. Every one of them has an excuse. It's too soon. There's not enough time. We just did this other one. This producer saying, "Oh, we're going to have all this to do." Everyone's kind of making all excuses, and it doesn't sound good. And Tammy, in the middle of one of their sentences, says, "Stop. I am reframing this conversation. We are doing this a week from Thursday. Given that, how do we do it?" 5 seconds of silence. And the first voice says, "We could do this." That's, well, why don't we do this? We could do this. Totally, these, again, 12 luminaries at the top of their profession in the entertainment industry nationally, totally reframed the conversation, and of course got it done that week from Thursday. It was the most impressive thing one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. But that's Tammy, tenacious, dogged, always fighting for something, always fighting for a cause, and incredibly effective.
So I want to talk about legacy for a moment on a couple of things. You have to start with COVID, right? I mean, that was a defining moment for New Jersey and the nation, you know, and certainly for the Murphy governorship. And COVID happened. You know, I apologize for putting this in a political context, but the reality is COVID happened the year before you were getting ready to run for re-election. I mean, Senator Helmy, you were at the lead of that. Tell me about the first time somebody sat down with Governor Murphy and told him what's coming.
So, this is breaking at the beginning of 2020, starting to happen overseas. There's some stories about the cruise liners. We form the task force, and I think, there's some calls, but the first formal calls on Super Bowl Sunday. And we're starting to plan ahead. There isn't a whole lot of information from the federal government, and every state's kind of doing this ad hoc, but we think we're ahead of it and we're planning. And then, he's going in for surgery because he had a cancerous tumor on his kidney. And, there's nothing that tells us at that point in time that this was probably really already spreading in the New York region at that time. And I remember it was March 4th. He is literally just out of surgery. And I send him a text that we have our first confirmed case, and I call Tammy. And obviously, God rest her soul, the lieutenant governor who was the acting governor at the time. And then I talked to his doctor, and, recovery could be between X days and X weeks. And I remember he was back in the saddle within 48 hours and probably at his first press conference before the week was out. And it was just competent, dedicated, empathetic leadership from day one. Did we make mistakes? Sure. Is it easy to say that now with more information? Of course. Did we do everything we thought? We were making the best decisions we could with the information we had. And that was all he could. He used the data and the science and every available resource, whether it was our state epidemiologist or resources in the Trump administration, to make the best decisions possible. And I'll tell you, David, the toughest times with Governor Murphy that I still get emotional about is, as Tim said, and I wasn't man enough to do it. He would call, I think for every day he did a press conference, he would call 3 families who had lost somebody, and he would talk to them, and then he would elevate the person in their life at a press conference later on. And the first few times, I would be in the room as he was calling these families, and I wasn't man enough to do it for much longer. I couldn't take it. And so, but he never stopped. He kept doing those calls. And then, every night, and Parimal and Mike and Tim and Dan and Christine were there for some of this, every night before we would go home. And in the months of, March, April, May, June of 2020, these were very late nights. He would ask for the death toll from the day before. And, walking into a dimly lit governor's office with Matt Plotkin, who was chief counsel at the time, to say, 1,000 New Jerseyans died the night before. Those are dark days. And he led with compassion and empathy, and he never tired. And he wanted to be speaking to the public. I mean, we were one of the last folks to stop the public press conferences because he thought it was important, whether it was one person or a million people listening to what he had to say when there was a pandemic and people were dying. That was what he was supposed to do as the leader. And I think when you think about legacy, he will be remembered very fondly for saving thousands and thousands of New Jersey lives and the tens and tens of thousands of family members who have somebody alive today that if we were reckless would not be with us today. And again, that's not to say that we were perfect or did everything right. We did the best we could with the information we had at the time, and it was because we had a data-informed governor at the top.
And I mean, I know you took a different path than some other governors, and you decided to forge a relationship with the White House, and use that relationship rather than being antagonistic to get things for New Jersey, whether it was respirators or equipment. I mean, how, in terms of a lesson in leadership, George, tell me about the governor's decision to put the partisan politics aside and go in that direction.
I think this is a testament to all great political leaders, elected leaders, and Jon, not blowing smoke, Jon being among them. You get more done for more constituents if you're willing to stay at the table and have meaningful conversations. And in the moment of crisis where the White House had access to the resources, access to ventilators, access to prescription medication, the best data, to take on the White House when you're begging for pieces of ventilators to fix the ones you have, or what ventilators they may have in the stockpile, that wasn't in the best interest of New Jerseyans. And, we forged relationships with Dr. Deborah Birx, Kellyanne Conway, Dr. Giroux, and obviously the President of the United States. And I was able to win the respect of Jared Kushner, who became like a COVID czar at that time. And it was not because I knew Jared at all. We were just data informed. And so every day for months, Jared was my first call in the morning, sometime around 7:00. And he would listen to the data. I would send it over. He would analyze it. And there are people alive today because of the relationship that Phil Murphy built with President Trump that trickled down to the relationships that I had with the staff. And we were able to get resources when other states were begging for the same resources. And we were able to get it because politics is about relationships. Life is about relationships. And Phil has mastered that, whether it be with Donald Trump, from COVID to the Portal Bridge, et cetera, all the way to leaders like Jon. You get more done in Trenton if you sit at the table and build meaningful relationships, not just transactional ones. So forgive me for being long-winded, but that's a leader. And that's, again, when we say Phil Murphy's legacy and an A+ governor, you look around at other Democratic governors and tell me one person who was willing to go down at that time with the politics the way they were, go down and sit with Donald Trump in the Oval Office to bring resources home. That's Phil Murphy.
Just to elaborate on one piece of that, and George alluded to this, but I think it's important to remember that the governor did this really despite an incredible personal toll on his health from the surgery. So that surgery was scheduled on March 4th. And George, I'm sure you remember this, but I believe the plan was for him to be down for the month of March, like not do any public events. I think there's a States for Gun Safety Summit that he was going to try to come and make a speech to if he was up to it. But other than that, he was supposed to be at home resting for 4 weeks. And instead, as George said, and as Tim said, he did these daily press briefings that early on, they were 2-3 hours, 60, 70 questions day after day. And that was probably the easiest part of his day, because that was when he wasn't actually leading the command apparatus of the state. But it was really an incredible performance. And just one personal anecdote from that time. So I was the deputy chief counsel, as George said. Matt was the chief counsel. And most of us, aside from a few like George and Matt and Colonel Callahan and Commissioner Persicelli, most people were working from home remotely. So I didn't really, during that time, have a ton of opportunities to sort of see the governor, in person. And I remember one time in the middle of March, it was, probably about 2 a.m. And, we were all working till 3:30, 4 a.m. every single day. And one time the governor shot me a text, and it was some, very specific question about an executive order that, he probably would have gone to Matt with, but was probably just trying to give him a break. And I remember responding to him, and I just sort of took the opportunity to say, I hope you're trying to get some rest. I know things are really crazy, and I hope you're taking care of yourself. And I remember he responded immediately, and he said something to the effect of, I'm just hanging in and trying to do my best and trying to get through each day. And that was really the attitude that he approached it with. And it was really extraordinary, because those were, I would say, as trying a time, or that was as trying a time as any governor in any state has ever faced.
David, you remember when Obama came during Sandy, and I remember for years people would see me and go, "I can't believe that Chris Christie was with Obama on the shore and he hugged him." Right? I mean, that's the kind of sick analysis that people do today. Here's a situation where people are dying, and Phil Murphy is dealing with the White House. I mean, who would object to that except ruthless partisans who are just full of hate? And so I thought Governor Murphy ignored that nonsense and for the betterment of the state.
He was,
that's hard, David. That's not to say, John, to that point, and that's not to say we're going to take a ton of shit from Democrats nationally and in our home base. How dare you go sit with him?
Well, that's all interesting. But when you have a job to do as a governor and you have to save lives, you have to get above that. And Phil Murphy did it. And I got to tell you, Chris Christie did it too. And, the certain wings of the party want you to be, in one lane, and they will accept nothing less than that. And that's dangerous for America. We're seeing that today.
Yeah. Tim, one of the things I've noticed about Governor Murphy is he's got this ability to sort of drown out the noise, like not care what people are saying. I am either he's a even more of a gifted actor than he was trained to be, or I've just totally misled. But I don't think he reads like any of the nasty comments on social media or anything like that.
I think in one of the legacy interviews we did, he said that was advice he'd give to the incoming gov. Don't read the comments because they can be pretty nasty. But no, he's got a tough skin. That's how he is. He is in it for the right reason and believes the actions he is taking is for the right reason and always on the right side of history. So he lets all the other garbage kind of roll off his back and moves on pretty quickly.
He also struck me, for better or for worse, as somebody who was willing to compromise, willing to do a deal, willing to get a part, sort of, and correct me if I'm wrong, a partial win was better than no win at all or a loss. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think you just kind of goes to, you look at the record of accomplishments and the collaboration with the Senate President Scutari, Speaker Coughlin. Wasn't always 100% of a goal. It wasn't always 100% at that time, but it was, to use one of his sports metaphors, where it was moving the ball down the field, always moving in the right direction.
Yeah, Phil would regularly say, is this an issue where status quo is acceptable and status quo is never acceptable? And, I know this to be true for Tim as well. What made him also a great manager is you knew where he wanted to go. You knew due north, but you had your parameters. And so if you could land here, that was acceptable. And if you landed here, that was better. And anywhere in the middle, you kind of knew the spectrum. And I think that's so true. And, and the Chiefs were typically tasked with negotiating with the Senate president, whether it be Sweeney or Scutari and Coughlin, you knew what was unacceptable and you could land that deal at the table there. And that's what made him a great manager.
Mike, when he first came into office, Sweeney had already been 8 years as Senate president. He knew his way around Trenton. The speaker and the governor were brand new. How did Phil Murphy, who had, as far as I know, never dealt with a legislature at Goldman Sachs, how did he deal? How did he walk in the door and say, I've got to deal with these people. There's 120 people, and they all have a voice, and I've got to figure out how to please enough of them to get the agenda through.
Yeah. So from my experience, while he may have not dealt with a legislature at Goldman Sachs, I think it's very clear that Phil was used to making deals with whoever was sitting at the table with him to get things done. Phil had a very ambitious agenda in that first campaign, and if you look back on it, he got, I think, maybe all but one done. I might be misremembering that. I think probably over the first 100 days, there was a lot of things that had been bottled up that he got done. But then from there, that first budget was a little tough. That was before George's time. But, I think once he got through that June, he kind of knew what needed to be done going forward. And a testament to George, too, in sort of building on that success in those early days. And really taking the governor and helping take the governor to the next level. The longer he got to know people, the more they liked him, the more he understood what made them tick. And I think that made him successful as time went along.
And Christine, you came from the advocacy side into state government. Tell me about the governor's, what it was like to you're in these meetings and the governor is sitting with advocates clearly less bendable than the average New Jersey state legislator. How did he get into that groove of being able to, move people into a more compromise, a position of greater compromise than maybe they had walked in desiring to do?
Yeah. The Gov is a fantastic listener. And so you're never going to be in a meeting with him where he's interrupting you or talking over you. And I think the advocates really appreciated that, that he's, listening to them. And there were, times when he would just say, can we get to a different place? And I remember being, negotiating something with the unions around telework, an issue George and I don't always see eye to eye on. And the governor just said, hey, can you just do this for me, Christine? And I was so dead set against a decision. And he just said, can you just make this happen? Can you just do this? And it was like that personal, like, let's just try to get there and find this compromise and have it be a decision that we can all, get behind. And I think he had a great way of doing that with advocates and with all of the staff that worked with him. It was, it was always about the personal interaction and the personal engagement that he had with everybody. And that, we've been talking about that the whole night. He was just a person that knew how to build relationships, how to be with people. And that's, I think, served the state incredibly well.
What was his, I don't know if any of you will tell me this, in this forum, but, aside from the obvious, aside from, the tragedies of COVID or situations where, there were, it just unfathomable, loss of human life or something. But give me an idea of what were the worst days in the governor's office? What were sort of the worst things that could happen that you would read the news and say, this is not going to be a good day for me?
I'll just start. I didn't have to effectuate it, George. I'm assuming you did, but ordering refrigeration trucks for the bodies at the hospitals. That was kind of, you think to yourself, you didn't really sign up for that type of thing. But that was kind of like a reality sort of hitting for me. I just remember that day very vividly, where I had to explain to counties or mayors, particularly at that time, it was starting to become a little bit more partisan, and complaining about this is shut down or that is shut down. I mean, just having to say, we're in the middle of ordering refrigerated trucks for people that because hospitals cannot take the intake they're getting. It's probably sometime in April, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that. That's well said, Mike. I think you could do that for most of COVID. Mine, it would be a similar when we were signing the contract for the refrigerated warehouse in Howell that was used predominantly to store Easter flowers from Norway, and we rented it out as a morgue to host bodies that had yet been claimed. We could get really sad about COVID. I'll give you a moment of levity, though, David. While we're ordering refrigerated trucks for the county MEs, the Department of Environmental Protection calls, like livid because the batteries or the engines that these things run on release fumes into the air, and they want us to cease purchasing the refrigerated trucks. So these are the kinds of things that that Phil would give us clear direction on, and we would move. But I think another I'll give you one of the most of the he was really devastated was when we had just had a great legislative session. Both Phil and I were taking a break. It was one of the few times we were both getting away at different times, and God rest her soul, Sheila Oliver died, and that was really, really emotional for him because she had unfortunately been deteriorating, but we thought she was going to come back around. That he took that very hard.
Yeah, for me, one that comes to mind is just a few months after the day that George mentioned. On New Year's Day, 2024, Louisa Carmen, who's a 25-year-old policy analyst in the governor's office, died in a car crash in the early morning hours of New Year's Day. And obviously, everyone in the governor's office was devastated. But one thing I remember is that we were preparing for the state of the state at the time, which the governor was going to deliver in, a week and a half or so. And we were doing the prep sessions where the governor would read through the speech and we'd give him this feedback. And I remember in each of the prep sessions, so after Louisa passed away, we put in a passage about her death and a call to action to pass a medical debt relief bill that she had been working on while in the governor's office. And I remember every time he got to that point of the speech in the read through, he would pause and he would look at the next few paragraphs and he would say, I can't do this. And he's like, I'll do it on game day, but I'm not going to be able to get through this in the prep session. And every time we did 3 or 4 of those prep sessions, and he would get to that passage and he would pause and say, I can't read that right now. And he's eulogized so many important and powerful people like in his life, but there was something about, the fact that there was this, 25-year-old brilliant aide in his office who was just at the beginning of her career that hit him differently. And, I think that really speaks to his humanity. And I think a lot of that is, because he's dad of 4 kids too. So I think that just sort of speaks to, how he views loss and his fundamental empathy.
So
I'll be slightly less morbid there, David, but just to give you another one here. I think in the first year of any administration, the highs are highs and the lows are low, right? And like said before, the governor made 52 core campaign promises. We accomplished 50 of them, but that wasn't the case early on, right? So early on, we were starting to tick through that list. It was ticking through a good amount at first and then kind of slow, right? So this is a guy who was going up against the status quo, going up against the establishment, especially back then. And, when we had other struggles in the first year, including that crazy snowstorm that took everyone 4 or 5 hours to get home and kind of came out of nowhere. And we would try to get something done and it would get pushed back. And there were days when it just felt like, man, this is all too much. Right. And like, I don't know where this is all going to go. Like looking back now, it's like, well, sure, we accomplished 50 of the 52. Yes, he got reelected. Of course, like it just feels like a straight path, but it didn't feel like that back then. So as you were going through that fight day in, day out, experiencing the highs, experiencing the very low lows, there were times when you're just saying, where are we going with this? Like, are we going to get there? Are we going to get reelected? Are we going to remain popular? Are we going to get these core agenda done? There were some, probably not just speaking for myself, I think a lot of us felt this way at certain times, hopefully not that often. But there were times early on where it just felt like, man, I hope we're on the right path here.
I mean, Senator Bramnick, you've been through a bunch of governors, during your career. Is this first weather events to a governor are a big deal? Especially the very first one. Is that sort of the rite of passage? Is that a point where people learn how to be governor? Sitting around realizing that roads aren't being plowed or things like that?
Well, if you remember, Chris Christie and Kim Quidano were away during a snowstorm early in his career. John Lindsay had that same problem. The thing I think that's most important is everything's relative in politics, right? So you would have a Phil Murphy, but you also had a Donald Trump. So part of it, look, I think he's a successful person. I think he's a close personal friend. But one of the things he was successful at was people were comparing him to the Republican brand during this period of time. Even when Joe Biden was there, you still had the Trump, you had the MAGA factor, and then, of course, later in his career, he had the Trump factor again. So it's always with the American public and with voters, like who's worse, right? And I'm not saying that if Phil Murphy didn't do a good job and wasn't a great guy because he's a personal friend, but it's always nice as a politician to be able to be less offensive than the other side. So during this entire period, it was him versus this new Republican MAGA party. And he was able to escape some of the bad things, including snowstorms, because I think people compared him to the Republican MAGA brand.
Yeah. So one of the other legacies of the governor, and we won't know this for years and years to come, is he appointed 5 justices to the New Jersey Supreme Court, and for a number of years, this is going to be the Murphy Court. We don't know what direction that's going to go in, but for those of you who worked on choosing justices, I mean, what was
I got to jump in on this one, right?
Yeah.
And let me tell you, Doug Fiscali, one of the finest human beings I've ever met. John Hoffman, one of the biggest hearts you ever met. Mike Noriega was my partner. I mean, the people that I know of those 3 that he put on the bench, you could not find more qualified and better human beings. I got to tell you, and I'm pretty tough on other lawyers. I'm pretty tough on other people. These are magnificent human beings, those 3.
So do you, Senator, before we go to, his would you give Phil Murphy an A+ on his Supreme Court picks?
Well, on those 3. Now, I actually didn't vote.
I don't know.
And I think I called Parimal in the office during this vote. I was on Judiciary, and I did vote for, what's her name again? I'm sorry. Right. Now, look, my problem with her was academically she was fabulous, but I didn't see any real experience. So I can't give him an A on that, but I'm hearing from people on the court that they think, and people have been before the court, that she's very thoughtful. I just didn't see that she had the experience in terms of practicing law. She was an advocate. So I called Paramount, so I can't vote for her on the floor. But, I can't tell you how she's going to do long term.
So totality, I'm going to try and pin you down here, Senator.
Well, the other woman,
totality of the 5. That's A-.
It's like being in a course. If you're in math, you can get A's, and then in social studies, you can get a D. Okay, I'm telling you, I can only talk about the 3 I know.
Yeah, so I would add to that, in addition to the 3 nominees that Senator Bramnick mentioned, both Fabiana Pierre-Louis and Rachel Wainer-Apter are truly wonderful jurists and human beings. And I think if you look at the 5 nominees in totality, they're all very different. Some of them were federal prosecutors, some of them were public defenders, some were lower court judges, some were civil litigators, some had background working for organizations like the ACLU, some worked. John Hoffman was the general counsel at Rutgers. So they all had very different experiences, but at the same time, one thing that united all of them was they were all wonderful human beings, but truly 5 of the best human beings that I've ever encountered. And that really stood out to the governor in the interview process. because that's really what he was looking for. He was looking for people who not only had really strong credentials on paper, but people who had a heart, people who had empathy, and people who are fundamentally good human beings. So I think that's one thing that united all of his 5 nominees. But I think that's how he viewed the judiciary, because at the end of the day, judges are people, and they need to know the law, but they're also they have the fate of people's lives in their hands, and you want them to be people of high character and integrity.
Yeah, I think he put his stamp on the whole judiciary, not just the Supreme Court. He's working with Senators Qatari and Stack, got to the lowest number of Superior Court vacancies in 20 years. And like Parimal said, it was always about the quality of the people.
And it's very effective when you have a new governor coming in, how quickly you can start putting judges on the bench, man. That's all it takes. Just a new governor, man. Stuff gets done.
I give some credit to the current chief and to the Senate president on that. Though I will say, one of my favorite meetings, Parimal, if you remember this, David, Parimal and I spent days preparing for our meeting with Senator Bramnick on Justice Noriega. We spent days on it. We asked him for breakfast at the Westfield Diner, John. Didn't tell him what it was about. I think the meeting lasted 7 minutes. The meeting was over before the eggs came, and he was like, "Yeah, great, Justice. I'm all in."
Yeah, well, wait a minute. I get a call from those two. They like to meet, and I'm going, let's see. All right, how about next week? No, how about tomorrow? I go, I don't know what I did. I assume I didn't get indicted. I really don't know. And when they showed up at the diner with those 2 SUVs, I'm trying to figure out, there must be something. Maybe they want me to resign. They want me to be a Democrat. Maybe they want me to go on the Supreme Court. And they go, we want Mike Noriega. Now, let me just say straight out, Mike Noriega is a fabulous lawyer, okay? But as a businessman...
By the way, with top-notch law firm, too, right? I mean, I just want to...
Well, let me just say this, okay? I love Mike Noriega. He is brilliant, great lawyer. But immigration department in my office does not make a lot of money, okay? So the bottom line was, don't get me wrong, I thought it was a perfect position for him, and it wasn't a financial disaster for the law firm, because immigration is just not a moneymaker. So, and we have in the new immigration department, which is actually my next daughter-in-law, it's great. I mean, they do great work, but you don't make any money.
This is reminiscent of that breakfast where we spent more time talking about the economics of law firms than Justice Noriega's credentials.
All right, when Chris Christie asked me to run for lieutenant governor, my first question was, how much does it pay? And Jeff Casey looked at me and said, bad question.
So I'll add something to this. Yeah. So just remember that this was May 2023. Senator Bramnick was preparing to run for governor in the Republican primary. And Mike Noriega had a background where, he had been a public defender. He had argued cases for the ACLU before the state Supreme Court. And even though he had worked at Senator Bramnick's firm, we knew that the senator might be under some political pressure, not to be, in full-throated support. And I remember when George and I were talking about going to meet with him, we were hopeful that he could be supportive. And like our best case scenario, the absolute, dream would be if Senator Bramnick would speak at the press conference announcing the nomination. And like George said, when we sat down with him and told him that Mike Noriega was her pick, number one, Senator Bramnick had no idea, which I think speaks to how seriously now Justice Noriega took the confidentiality of the process. But Senator Bramnick thought about it. And I remember he paused for probably about 15, 20 seconds. And then he said, that's a beautiful choice. And Mike Noriega is a beautiful human being. And at the end of the breakfast, he volunteered to speak at it. He was like, oh, by the way, do you think, I could say a few words at the press conference? We didn't even have to ask him. And that really took enormous political courage, because it was not, the easy political path for someone to take who's going to run in a Republican primary. But it really speaks to why.
Well, I think my 6% of the vote in the Republican primary reflects my decision making for the past 2 years.
So, Senator, I'll take one more pass at this. when you include the two justices that were re-nominated by Governor Murphy, so that was 7 Supreme Court votes. You voted for 6 of those 7, one of whom was your law partner that you're calling, the greatest choice in the history of the state. Can we get to an A- from you on the governor's Supreme Court?
The reason I can't do that because I don't know.
You made a trial lawyer. There's nothing I can do here.
No, I can't do it because I don't know how the other 2 will vote down the road. But remember, I'm a plaintiff's lawyer. So my entire practice in my life has been with the plaintiff, with the consumer. So I probably don't have any problems with the picks of the governor. I just don't know where the other 2 justices will end up on consumer issues, because to me, consumer issues are the most important. And I don't even know where Mike Noriega, John Hoffman, or Doug Vachali will be. But generally, I think he did a pretty good job making those picks, but I won't give a grade.
All right, so we're going to come back after you get reelected in 27. You'll have to vote on those nominees for tenure. So I guess we'll get the answer then. And by the way, I'm joking with you. I've got a lot of respect for how you look at judges, and you're no pushover when it comes to this stuff, and that's your job. And let me ask this and I can start with you, Senator Bramnick, but different people have different definitions of advice and consent, and some, like you, believe that your job is to look at a nominee and say, this may not be who I'd put in if I were the governor, but this is the person who won the election. Elections have consequences, and I'm going to vote for this person. You voted for a lot of cabinet members, not just Murphy, Christie, but also Corzine and Cody and well, you weren't in the Senate then, but you were.
Yeah.
I'm off of my timeline, but what's Governor Murphy's legacy in terms of dealing with the Senate, dealing with the legislature on appointments, on frustrating, and then I want to ask Parimal and Senator Helmy about frustration levels of the governor when people are just trying to make a deal regardless of the quality of the appointments.
Well, I think it's when Chris Christie became governor and Tom Kean Sr. met with Chris Christie, he asked Chris, "Who's your best friend?" And Chris said, "Mary Pat." And he said, "Not anymore. It's a Senate president," right? So the real key factor is that Phil Murphy has developed a relationship with Nick Scutari. And I think the challenge for a Mikey Sherrill is going to be, that's a very tenuous situation between a Senate president and a governor. And Phil Murphy was able to do that. And what I do sitting on judiciary is I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to the governor unless there's something that is so serious that it would cause me to vote against the nominee. I voted for Matt Platkin. I took a lot of heat on that. People had serious concerns. I can tell you that I think a governor is entitled to his choices after he wins or she wins, up to a point if the person is qualified.
So, George, how hard was it when you had a qualified nominee and you wanted to get Senate confirmation and you were just being held hostage by a senator who maybe was less interested in the qualifications and more interested about the deal that they could craft?
Hard, and it could be very frustrating, especially when you had somebody, as you said, who was just a public servant and wanted to do a good job in some role that required advice and consent, and you had to broker a 12-way deal, in order to get that done. I had a great relationship with both the former Senate president and obviously Senate President Nick Scutari, but there were a number of our cabinet picks, including Colonel Callahan, who were held up for a long time. And that was, and I've made this clear, not speaking out of school, but that was deeply frustrating and very personal to me because of a personal relationship with Pat. But even with that frustration, David, I would tell you I'm a big believer in advice and consent. And we came out of a rather tough relationship in the first year of the Murphy administration with the Senate president and his executive director. But we worked at it, we chiseled through the ice, and then we started moving big packages and big judge packages and big, whether it be the BPU, where Christina's president or others. You just needed to know, hey, what was important to us? What was important to Steve Sweeney and Kevin Drennan? Now it's important to Senate President Nick Scutari and Jess Cohen, and you figure out the transactions, and then you got to go one level deeper and work the advice and consent within the counties or the districts in which people live in. So it can be deeply frustrating, but nothing in government is easy, and it's about priorities and how quickly you want to make transactions. I do think that there are probably ways that we could do specifically Superior Court justices quicker. And that's something that I think took us both as an administration too long, and the art of the deal takes too long. But that's it. It's frustrating, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, it didn't take Hillmann that long, but
not everybody can be Tim Hillmann, David. I mean,
Tim, I was, when I sat with the governor a couple of weeks ago, you were with us, and I asked him about senatorial courtesy. I was surprised by his answer that he likes it. I would imagine that a governor's staff would be frustrated by that process.
I think you kind of pull on the strings. George talked about it. It is a frustrating process, but it's everything in government can be, and you find the levers to work through it. I'll tell you, it's a great relationship builder having to work through senatorial courtesy, because you're constantly on with these senators talking about what they need, what their priorities are, and you're building relationships with folks you would not typically interact with or talk to, because it's a minority senator from somewhere who has courtesy. But you have to get to know them, get to know what's important to them, and be able to work through those deals and appointments.
By the way, we should just take this opportunity to shout out the need for a competent, coherent, efficient appointments director, because as a chief of staff, you can spend every day, every moment of your life worrying about appointments and workers' comp and ALJ judges and how far down you want to go. And we've been fortunate, at least from the time I was there to, my successors at Sam Parker's been in that role. And, I don't know who the incoming administration has, but I wish them the best of luck, and super, super important and undervalued role in an administration.
Yeah, I would say one more thing on senatorial courtesy. While the governor was always respectful of it and mindful of it, he also didn't allow it to dictate his decision-making. And I think the nomination of Rachel Lehner-Apter is probably the best example of that, because I remember as we were going through the vetting process, I remember George and I had a meeting with the governor in his office in Newark, and Senator Cardinale had just today, and Assemblywoman Shapisi had been elevated to the Senate. And we knew that Assemblywoman Shapisi, when she got to the Senate, she was a rising star in the Republican Party, and she might have future ambitions as well. So we weren't sure how she would respond to the nomination of Rachel Lehner-Apter. And I remember the governor asked us, well, do you think that she'll sign off on it? And I remember, we said, well, we're not sure. But then I remember I told him, I was like, I can tell you one thing, that Rachel Lehner-Apter is the best possible person I can find for you to put on the state Supreme Court. And he said, well, that's all that matters. And he said, go get it done. And obviously it took a year and a half. And a lot of gray hairs from George, but we were ultimately able to get it done. And that's how he viewed the process. He viewed it as a necessary and beneficial part of the process, but ultimately he still retained his prerogative to pick the people who he thought were best.
Dan,
remember when Cardinale made one of our appointees go to the dentist office to prove residency? There's some great stories, David.
Yeah. I will tell you, and it's a story I tell a lot about Jerry Cardinal once, and I'd known him, since the late '70s, and he said that he had gotten to a point after nearly 40 years in the Senate where he could look at an appointment and calculate in his head on a Bergen County appointment what commission he could get, what he could get for that appointment without killing it altogether. And the way he explained it to me is, he says, it's like when you go to the airport and you rent a car and you think it's $50 a day, but then you go and you see all the different fees and the taxes and everything, and it's really a lot more. He said the key to me is to know how much I could get for that rental car before somebody says, the hell with it, I'm just going to Uber, keep your car. And he said that came with, I think Gormley was like that too, but it came from experience. And I guess you saw that a lot, George Parimal, of senators that had been there for a long time. They were there before Governor Murphy. They were going to be there after Governor Murphy, and they knew what they were doing in terms of courtesy. So, Dan, one of the questions I always have with the governor on these appointments is when did he come to the realization that even though the Constitution says the governor shall appoint judges of the Superior Court, when did he realize that that's really something he shares with senators and county chairs and others?
Boy, David, I hate not claiming expertise over a subject. It might be the first time you've ever heard me say this, but this is
it is.
I don't think George or Parimal or ever let me anywhere near a judicial appointments process. Listen, I would just say, I'll be slightly generic here. I don't know that he wasn't, George spoke to this, Tim and Parimal spoke to this. He was always inclusive on this. He was always respected the process. He always expected other people, accepted other people's roles in these processes, right? Like, not only did he respect it, I will say, listen, I think he's a salesman at heart, and I'm learning as I get more into my business life. Everything is sales, everything in life. He saw it as ways of bringing people in, right? And building relationships stronger. So not only did he see these things as I got to include the legislature, I got to include this county chair. He would see it as opportunities, as hey, let me talk to this person, see maybe if they like this person, maybe I can sell them on it. Maybe they've got an idea for me, right? All of these things are opportunities, right? So again, this is a guy who is an A++ interpersonal skills, right? And an unbelievable memory when it comes to people. He would use these processes as opportunities. I don't think he ever really resented it. He kind of always saw them as opportunities.
Yeah. So let me, before we, as we begin to wrap up, I want to go through each of you and ask, let's start with Christine, and we'll go counterclockwise, assuming my screen's the same as yours, and end with George Helmy. What's your takeaway? What's your number one takeaway of working for Phil Murphy, and what are you going to miss most about him when his term expires tomorrow?
Wow. I think that he really always, every single decision was thoughtful, and he always felt like he was doing what was right for the state. And I think that is something that everybody here, I think, also feels that way. But when you talk to him, when you brief him on something, when you're in a meeting with him, that he's putting the thought in and putting the time in to get to the decision that he really feels like is right. And I don't think that we appreciate how hard it is to be in that kind of position and make the right decision every single time. And maybe they weren't always the right decision, but he certainly came to the decision wanting to do what was right for the state of New Jersey.
And Senator, we'll go to you.
Well, they became very close personal friends for Patricia and I. So Tammy and Phil, I don't know how it clicked, but it clicked really more of a personal relationship than a political relationship. And all the time we've spent together, the four of us, I don't think I ever brought up anything in terms of policy or politics, or neither did he. And I'll miss that. I'll miss that. And I think we'll continue to be close friends. I just want to say that the relationship that Tammy and Phil have, to me, indicates or shows how real relationships happen. They're both really bright. Um, you watch them interact. I mean, that's what relationships should be. So, from the political standpoint, I may disagree with them. From a friendship standpoint, they've become some of our closest friends.
We'll go to Tim. So.
I haven't had a lot of time to think about what I'm going to miss, as I'm still in the throes of it. I'll miss working for him. He's a great person to work for. Learned a ton. He's always going a million miles an hour, and just keeping up with that is a great professional challenge. And I think Christine hit it on the head, just about he always does what he thinks is right for New Jersey, and that's always his North Star and his compass, and that was a great thing to witness firsthand.
And Dan?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a very selfish answer. Like, he was just a blast. He was a blast to deal with on a daily basis. And, even in the last 4 years since I've left government, he would get my take on things from time to time. And he's a guy that liked big swings and wasn't afraid to go directly at things, and he had a bit of a fearless quality to him. And he would say, hey, do you think I should do this? Good again, personal example here is we had an issue in Maplewood about Halloween. Halloween wasn't allowed for a few years here. So he called me. He wanted to say something about it. And he called me and he goes, do you think I should do this? I feel like I should do this. I was like, yeah, do it. Like, it's crazy, right? And he just did it. And he didn't have to. He just felt like it was the right thing to do. It's a very silly, small example, but you can apply that to much, much bigger intractable problems, right? And not only did he kind of work hard, do big things, he did it in a way that was very joyful. There was always a lot of, not always, most of the times, it was a very joyful experience working with him, being around him. It was exciting. It was intense. And honestly, just top to bottom, it was a blast. So I know that we're all still going to be dealing with him on a fairly often basis. And I'm really excited to see what comes next for him, by the way. But that is what I will miss the most, is just that kind of the day-to-day experience of, hey, I've got this issue. What do you think we should do? And have the ability to say, you know what? I'm not going to tone this down. I'm going to tell you what I think you should do. It's a bit big. And then he would go do it.
Mike?
I've been thinking about this for a few weeks now. I very much came in to work for the governor as a boy, and now I feel like I'm a man. And I think what I miss most about him is he treated everyone like family. Everything everyone else said prior to me is correct. But he wasn't afraid to give you tough love. He wasn't afraid to try to be gentle, to pick you up if you're down. And I think that, the teamwork, so I don't know if Senator Bramnick mentioned this or not, the teamwork between him and his wife is really an emulation of what, relationships should be. So I think, my hope is that Mikey picks the ball up and goes there. I think she will in a lot of ways, but there's no doubt that, Phil and Tammy were one of a kind that we might not ever see again.
Parimal Garg.
Yeah, one thing that I'll miss is that Governor Murphy was really committed to bringing new people into the process and entrusting them with major responsibilities. So he wasn't afraid to have younger chief counsels or chiefs of staff or chief policy advisors or attorney generals or solicitor generals or justices of the Supreme Court. He wasn't, beholden to the same types of people, who had staffed prior administrations. He was willing to give new people a shot and to entrust them and stand behind them. And I think that's, really special, because it speaks to, his confidence that, there's a lot of talent out there that, even if it's, not part of the normal political world can be brought in to the political world. And I think it also, it gives all of us an opportunity to really carry his legacy forward, because people will be able to take the experience that they've had, working in this administration or being appointed by this administration, and still have a good part of their career to do, things in the future and hopefully continue their service to the state.
And George Helmy, I mean, he appointed you to the United States Senate. I mean, that's you've been very privileged to have some of the honors that came with working with him. You also were the at the top of the totem pole. Sometimes the person who had to take some of the incoming. But I know your personal relationship with him. What are you going to remember most about him, and what are you going to miss about him?
Yeah, I've had the great privilege of being honored by the governor to do a number of things, obviously. And first and foremost, the best job I've ever had in my life would be, working with the majority of these folks as the governor's chief. I would rate that significantly higher than being a United States senator, because you can actually get things done. That being said, I many of my colleagues cover this in different ways, but all of us know here, because we've spent a lot of time with Phil and Tammy, I will just miss his sense of humor. I mean, he is genuinely freaking funny and loves to have a good time and loves to laugh. I mean, David, when we had a breakfast a few times down in Florida, and he's just, bending over laughing at stuff that he would say or stories he would tell you. And the evenings with Patricia and John, like, they are just a lot of fun, and they love to laugh, and they love for people to laugh with them. And I'll miss that. I know many of us will stay a part of their lives, but that's going to be a transition, and they brought a lot of joy into our lives with humor in other ways. So that I'll miss.
So I'll end this with maybe a show of hands. Is there anybody here who thinks that Phil Murphy will watch this last hour and a half of our lives and hear a word of what we said?
Phil or Tammy? There's the two different questions.
I'm very specific about the governor. I have a different view of the first lady on this.
Yeah, no chance.
No words.
He knows the score of the national championship.
Watching,
That's right.
Watching Indiana versus Miami.
Well, let me say this, and I think Senator Bramnick will join me on this. All of you, through good times and bad, and whether there's agreements or disagreements, public service is important, and each of you gave up a lot to do the jobs that you did, and you gave up times with your family. You gave up. You left a lot of money on the table, despite what people might think about government. Each of you are very talented, and public service is sacrifice. And I know that not one of you regrets that. And I hope Senator Bramnick agrees with me. That's commendable for all of you to have participated in the process, served in this administration and done the job that you were asked to do. And Senator, you're being very quiet. Did I say something wrong?
No. Remember, I'm the minority member of this panel, so I'll allow the majority to respond.
Fair enough. I just want to say thank you to everybody. This has been quite a journey, and I think it'll be like that through every governor. It's always that way. But one of the things that I've always liked the best about dealing with governors are the people that work for them and believe in what they're doing, and like I said, sacrifice a lot. So thank you all for being on this. Tim, you have 14 more hours about.
Yeah, I'm actually doing this from my wife's computer because I already had to turn mine in. So
yeah. So,
David, if I may, I would just say, from me, and then others can chime in. I would say, for people who are watching, Phil did things the right way, and I would just say John does things the right way. John and I probably disagree on the majority of policy issues, but civil debate and dialogue is the way things get done. And Jon's always been a gentleman about that. And you thanked us, and I think on behalf of my colleagues, I would thank you. You mentioned that you started this right before the Murphy administration came in, and you have journalism is equally as important to serving in the public. To me, it is a public service, and you and your colleagues on the globe have stepped in where traditional media has been deteriorating. So and that doesn't mean that we agreed all the time, David, and you held us accountable, and that's just the way it is. And we fought and debated, but thank you and your colleagues at the Globe for stepping up. The shit that happens in Trenton is super important to people in New Jersey, and someone's got to cover it with discipline and digging into the details and how it gets made. And I applaud, as you applaud us, I applaud the work that you and your colleagues do.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate everything. And Tim, like I said, 14 more hours. Don't screw anything up. And Christine, you are still employed tomorrow, so you have to go back to work and continue on behalf of the state. So thank you, everybody, for doing this. I appreciate it, and I'm glad that this is out there to just sort of have its little place in history as to what people who were closest to this governor said on the night before he left office. So have a great night, everybody. Bye.
Thanks all.
Thank you.